For decades, Africa was told to survive quietly, not to question, not to challenge, not to disrupt, to export, not to transform, to extract, not
We
to
were never
industrialize,
silent.
to
We were
follow,
listening.
never to lead. Generation after generation was taught that progress came from elsewhere, that solutions arrived from outside, that leadership wore foreign faces and spoke foreign languages. Africa was trained to wait, to depend, to accept. And for a long time, that silence worked. But something changed. Not overnight, not in one country, not with one revolution. It started quietly. In classrooms, in homes, online forums, late-night conversations. Across the continent, a new generation began asking dangerous questions. Why do we import what we can build? Why do nations rich in oil struggle to fuel themselves? Why do lands overflowing with minerals remain poor? Why are our resources wealthy, but our people are not? And the most dangerous question of all, who benefits from this system staying exactly the same? Because once those questions were asked, there was no going back. You cannot unsee truth once it reveals itself. You cannot return to ignorance after awareness. You cannot accept dependency once you recognize design. This generation didn't just complain. They investigated. They followed the money. They followed the supply chains. They followed history. And what they found was not
We
failure,
build faster
but
when we
structure.
remember where we began.
A system built to extract, not empower, to consume Africa, not develop it. That realization changed everything. Young Africans started reclaiming what history tried to erase. They studied pre-colonial empires, not as myths, but as systems. They studied indigenous governance, not as folklore, but as functioning institutions.
Why do we learn about kings
They
who never
revisited
walked
African
here? We
science,
grow cotton,
engineering,
but wear clothes
agriculture,
made
and
where?
trade. They learned that Africa
wrote
once
the
fed
rules?
itself, manufactured for
Now we
itself,
ask.
traded across continents. They discovered that governance worked before interference, that economies functioned before disruption, that identity existed before erasure. And slowly, a truth emerged. The problem was never Africa's lack of ability. It was the design of dependence. The design that punished manufacturing. A design that rewarded extraction. A design that discouraged unity. A design that trained Africa to sell cheap and buy expensive. Once that design was understood, it could be challenged. And that's exactly what began to happen. From fintech hubs in Lagos redefining access to money, to manufacturing zones in Ethiopia adding value instead of exporting loss, to agricultural revolutions in Rwanda restoring food sovereignty, to Pan-African trade agreements breaking colonial borders, Africa began rewriting its own script. Not perfectly, not evenly, but deliberately. This wasn't noise, it was momentum. This awakening isn't loud everywhere. It doesn't always trend. It doesn't always make global headlines. It doesn't always receive applause, but it is real, and it is growing. Sometimes power doesn't announce itself. It prepares, and it's threatening. Because the self-reliant Africa doesn't beg. It negotiates. It doesn't export raw pain. It exports finished value. It exports ideas. It exports leverage. A self-aware Africa is unpredictable, and unpredictability unsettles systems built on control. The lie was that Africa would never rise without permission. But the truth? Africa was never incapable. It was only asleep.
This story is part of Kua Tales.